Hello and welcome to the Barksdale Air Force Base Defenders of Liberty Airshow in the United States of America, our first airshow dispatch from the western side of the Atlantic. Barksdale is known as Bombertown, USA, with over 40 B-52s based on the airfield. The bomber fleet features heavily in Barksdale's annual airshow, which this year hosted one of the premier military lineups of any North American airshow in 2019. Let's get straight to it then and take a look at that lineup and our running order. The B-52, as we mentioned, opens proceedings. We've got two classic jets early in the programme, the Aeroshell aerobatic team, then the F-35 marking the halfway point, and closing the show, the 9 CT-114s of the Canadian Forces Snowbirds in a quarter of an hour. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by the man behind the camera, Tim Passmore. Tim, it looked like a fantastic show.
Right. This is a lineup that really focuses on finesse over power and speed. We are in for a real treat today.
Now, I mentioned earlier the B-52 Stratofortress, and you can see that aircraft approaching now. The bomber fleet actually played a slightly smaller role in the show than it has done in the past, but still, it's always great to see these flypasts.
It's almost like a family reunion for me, Adam. When I was in the Air Force some time ago, I worked on the AGM-28 Hound Dog, which was carried by the B-52. Even then we joked about how old it was, and yet here it is today, as strong as ever.
And due to remain in service until 2050, which is quite extraordinary. And another US Air Force heavy, this time a KC-135, the backbone of the Air Force's aerial refueling capabilities, and an aircraft that has seen some export success as well to Singapore, Chile, Turkey and France.
Here comes our first classic jet of the day, Adam. This is Greg Collier and his great T-33 Shooting Star Acemaker 2.
Yes, indeed. And I mentioned export success earlier. This was an aeroplane that certainly had some. It was developed from the Lockheed P-80, the first operational American jet fighter, which first flew in 1944 and racked up only a modest sales record. But when the T-33 followed in 1948, it saw immediate and sustained popularity. It served with some 41 nations right across the world and was only retired from active service from the Bolivian Air Force in 2017.
Greg has been flying for over 35 years, but he's actually an Army veteran. After the Army, he was an air traffic controller in Oakland for almost 30 years. And he's now been flying classic jets for over a decade. He got a Czech L-29 Delphine back in 2003, and then this T-33 in 2008. He also works now for the Army and the Navy test pilot schools. He's a busy man.
If you want to have a closer look at Greg's performance, Tim, I believe he was carrying one of your cameras.
That's right, Adam. Greg mounted it right next to his head, and he got some really nice footage of the instrument panel as well as out in front of the airplane, and you can see all of the things that he sees. Fans can go to the This Is Flight YouTube channel and see a great split-screen synchronized video of this right now.
Now, Tim, this is a rather interesting act too, very popular in the United States, so tell us a bit about what we're watching now.
The Tora 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 team does a really brief reenactment of the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. These aircraft are all reconfigured T-6 Texans, the same airplane that we're going to be seeing Aeroshell flying in later. The replicas include two Japanese Zero fighters, two Nakajima Cape torpedo bombers, and one Aichi Val dive bomber.
We saw a few moments ago one of the early American jet aircraft. Here is one from the Soviet Union, the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-17. In 1946, to great protest by the United States, the British government authorised the sale of 40 Rolls-Royce Nene turbojet engines to the Soviet Union. And very shortly afterwards, the Russians began manufacturing jet fighter aircraft of their own with great ferocity and talent. First came the MiG-15, introduced in 1949, which outclassed virtually everything the West had to offer and was soon shooting down American fighters in the Korean War. The MiG-17 is a subsequent development of that design, and it entered service in 1952.
Randy Ball flies a great demo designed to show off the strengths of the MiG. It had really tight turning characteristics and it climbed like a rocket. The other thing Randy does really well is show off the afterburner of this Russian engine. It looks like a blowtorch on wings, and he uses it to his advantage and puts on an excellent show, especially in the evening.
Well, talk about contrast. This is Jeremy Holt in his Pitts Model 12. But Jeremy is more used to flying the kind of aircraft we saw opening the programme because his day job is flying B-52s for the United States Air Force.
Jeremy does a great job flying this Pitts 12. This airplane is built around a Russian 9-cylinder radial engine that rotates backwards to most U.S. radial engines. As you're looking at it from the pilot's point of view, his engine turns counterclockwise, whereas most engines turn clockwise. This obviously results in backwards torque, and if you watch him carefully, you can see a difference in how he comes out of different maneuvers, especially climbs.
The Pitts Model 12 is a relatively recent Pitts design. Here's an extraordinary fact. This plane was created by the very same person who designed the original Pitts Special back in 1940, Curtis Pitts. Mr. Pitts completed the Model 12 design on his 80th birthday in December 1995, and the aircraft flew for the first time 3 months later. The unmistakable sound of a quartet of Pratt & Whitney R1340 engines as the Aeroshell aerobatic team begin their show.
This Aeroshell team is one of the standards on the U.S. Airshow circuit. They've been flying these North American T-6 Texans since 1984, when they were called the North American Aerobatic Team. They got Aeroshell sponsorship and took on that name in 2001. They remain so popular because they fly such nice, tight, smooth formations and make an old crate like the North American T-6 Texan look regal.
Oh, absolutely. And look at these formations closely. Absolutely perfectly executed for the duration of the display. It is rare to see this level of precision from any civilian team. The T-6 Texan is one of the most successful training aircraft of all time, based upon the North American NA-16 Yale. More than 15,000 Texans were built across all its variants, which of course includes the Harvard, the SNJ, the A-27, among many others, and they were used by some 60 nations. Despite first taking to the air in 1935, the Texan remained in South African Air Force service until as recently as 1995. Now a change of pace once again as we welcome the United States Air Force F-35A Lightning II.
This new F-35 show is just amazing. The Air Force worked over the winter to transition to this new show, and it really shows off the F-35's capabilities. From topping out of a high-speed climb into a fluttering pedal turn as a plane drifts down to the ground, to incredibly sharp turns, to going from a high alpha pass that looks like it can't fly, to being rocketing skyward in seconds. This airplane is just phenomenal.
It does take time to build up to full demonstration capabilities. Until recently, American F-35As were not certified to fly aerobatics and had avionics software that limited the amount of G they could pull. All that has now changed, and you can see the results, this being one of the most impressive displays you will see from any conventional, i.e. non-thrust vectoring Western fighter. With the amount of time, money and effort poured into the Joint Strike Fighter program over the last few decades, you would hope the result would be pretty spectacular. And sure enough, it is, as you're seeing right now with this very dramatic half-square loop.
This next pass isn't just a crowd favorite. Pilot Andrew Olson, callsign Dojo, has said it is his favorite too. There are three variants of the F-35 that are flying. The main is the A model, U.S. Air Force, as well as Air Forces of Australia, Israel, Japan, Netherlands, Italy, and maybe more. The VTOL, VTOL version, the B, is primarily being produced for the United States Marine Corps and the Royal Air Force, as well as the Royal Navy. The last version is a strengthened version, the F-35C, which is the largest one with folding wingtips. The Navy's going to be using that one.
The aircraft powers out of a high alpha pass, aided by its Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine, producing 40,000 pounds of thrust. And compare that to the F-16, for instance, which has roughly 25 to 30,000 pounds of thrust, depending on the variant.
At the end of their performances, the U.S. demo teams will fly what we call a heritage flight in formation with a World War II vintage Warbird. Today's flight was supposed to have been with one of the original Lightnings, the P-38. It wasn't able to come, so we have this Mustang performing for us instead.
Indeed, and the Heritage Flight display profile has actually been updated for this year, increasing from 3 passes to 5. It really is great to see the US Air Force commemorating its past so frequently and so comprehensively. I don't think there is any other Air Force in the world that does anything that quite compares to the USAF Heritage Flight program.
One last solo pass by the F-35, and it's time to move on to a pair of solo aerobatic acts. The first one is going to be the incredible Rob Holland in his MXS-RH.
The MXS-RH is a customised version of the MXS Racer, a highly specialised aerobatic and racing aeroplane which is perhaps most famous for its participation in the Red Bull Air Race, where it's been flown by the likes of Matt Hall, Nigel Lamb and Mika Brageau. There are only 12 in existence, but it is an extremely agile performer, as you can see, capable of rolling at around 420 degrees per second, pulling up to 16 G and reaching a top speed in excess of 300 miles per hour.
Rob Holland is easily the most impressive aerobatic pilot I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. You watch him fly, and you're not going to be surprised to learn that he is an 8-time U.S. National Aerobatic Champion, the 9-time U.S. Freestyle Aerobatic Champion, and 4-time World Freestyle Aerobatic Champion. He is going to defend that championship later this year right down the road from my place in a town called Salina, Kansas.
Yeah, that's the US National Championships in September, and I believe in August he'll also be contesting the world title in Châteauroux in France. This Act 2 has links to the Red Bull Air Race. This is Challenger class race pilot Kevin Coleman flying his Extra 300 SHP, a high-performance version of the very successful Extra 300 with a Lycoming AO580 engine producing 315 horsepower. The base model of the Extra 300 first flew in 1988, and it has dominated competition aerobatics pretty much ever since. It's also been used by the Red Bull Air Race, and by several well-known aerobatic teams such as the Chilean Halcons, the Blades, the Northern Lights, Crisacti, the Royal Jordanian Falcons and the Equipe de Voltige.
Kevin's the second hometown hero we have flying today. He joined the Red Bull Air Race Challenger class back in 2016 when he was just 26. And he won his first race in just his fourth try at Ascot in the UK. His first season he finished third, and he was just expected to move on to the master class next year. So everyone's really disappointed now that the series is ending this September.
9 Canadair CT-114 tutors now fill the sky as the Canadian Forces Snowbirds begin their performance with an impressive routine of formation aerobatics. The tutor has been retired from the training role in the Royal Canadian Air Force, but has been kept on solely as the display aircraft for the Snowbirds. This makes the RCAF one of just 2 air forces in the world to operate a turbojet aircraft solely for the purpose of formation aerobatic displays, the other being the United Arab Emirates Air Force, who purchased the MB339 for their aerobatic team Al Fasan. Despite production ending all the way back in 1966, the Snowbirds tutors are due to remain in service for many years to come. The fleet will be upgraded in 2022 and will continue to serve until around 2030.
A Snowbird show is just a display of master airmanship. Just watch one of the individual airplanes during one of their large group maneuvers, and watch all of the intricate flying that one pilot has to do just to maintain formation. It is some incredible work that few people seem to appreciate. Before flying started on Sunday, I asked one young man what he'd thought about the Snowbirds. He kind of rolled his eyes and said, "They're no Blue Angels." Sadly, that kind of sums up what seems to have been the community attitude about the Snowbirds. An incredible, amazing show right in their backyard, and there was nobody there. The crowd was just depressingly light all weekend.
Well, it is certainly true. You do get a very different style of display from teams using trainers, but it fills the sky exceptionally well, and it's a style that I find enormously entertaining. North American audiences, by the way, can expect a similar structure to the display when the Red Arrows come visiting later this year, and Tim, I know that's something you're looking forward to.
We will be at the Spirit of St. Louis Airshow this September to catch the Red Arrows perform and produce one of these great videos for you.
Yes, indeed, and that's one of just many air shows that we'll be covering like this year. We'll leave you now with some more footage of the Canadian Forces Snowbirds, but until next time, from Tim Passmore and from me, Adam Landau, it's goodbye for now.